Did you know we can open our heart with more than just backbends? So I know the term heart openers has come to be pretty synonymous with backbending, with like arching the spine back and spinal extension. And that is certainly one way in which we can open the heart. But I actually like to think of heart opening in a more broadened perspective, more of a 360-degree idea of heart opening. Because if we're talking about the heart, whether we mean the physical, literal organ of the heart or just this general region, the heart is actually here in our thoracic cavity, and that's like our rib cage cavity. And that rib cage, the thoracic cavity, has a front and anterior. It has sides, lateral, and it also has a backside, posterior. So technically, if we want to open the heart or mobilize this general region of the body, there are really so many more movement opportunities available to us than backbending alone. Opening the heart could be a much broader category that could, of course, include backbends, but it could just as easily include forward bends. So spinal flexion here actually opens or mobilizes the back of the heart. And then lateral flexion and also rotation also mobilize more of the lateral sides of the thoracic cavity. So in this video, I would just like to present maybe a more broadened perspective of 360-degree heart opening. And we'll go over, I'm just going to highlight like one example for each of the directions of motion that I think can be productive for heart opening. And I would like to include shoulder blade movement in this conversation because we know we have the shoulder blades, the scapulas on the upper back, they can move around as well. And they could also, depending on what we're meaning when we say heart opening, the position of the shoulders can contribute to potential heart opening. And in that type of isolating the shoulder blades, that could also be a way that we could open the heart. So let's dive in and just take a look at some of these good examples of 360-degree heart opening. Okay, let's start looking at this broadened perspective on heart opening by first looking at spinal movement. And after that, we'll take a look at some shoulder blade movement. So first of all, when it comes to spinal movement, we know that like our stereotypical heart opener is a back bend. It is spinal extension. So let's take a look at just one example of that, and an example that I really like. This particular example, it will use a yoga block, and I like it because it really can isolate the extension specifically to the thoracic spine region and the rib cage spine. And when we're talking about heart openers, that's kind of what we mean, right? Is like the thoracic cavity. So rather than being more of like a whole spine back bend, this particular spinal extension move is focused on the thoracic spine. And we could do it really in many different positions, but I often, when I teach this, I often like to do it in a low lunge. So I'm just going to show it that way here. So we take the block, reach it up overhead, and then we place it behind us so that the top edge of the block will touch the back of our head and the bottom edge of the block will touch our shoulders. So point of contact, head and shoulders. And this will effectively lock our head and our shoulders as one unit, and it will prevent us from like moving a lot at our neck. So all of this can move as one unit, and then we'll hold the block there, and we think of the bottom edge of the block. And from there, we use that edge of the block to scoop forward and lift up. And then here we are able to really target and isolate more of just a thoracic back bend or an upper and mid back bend. And we could do this statically. We could hold this for like several breaths. We could also do it dynamically. We could arch up, but then we could also round down and then lift up from that rounded position and move in and out like this. So this would be a little more of a dynamic option. But so this block focused back bend is one way that I like to work on extension. And again, spinal extension is the classic heart opener. But let's look now at some more possibilities for the spine when it comes to heart opening. Okay, so we just looked at one of my favorite ways to mobilize the heart into extension. Now let's look at one of my favorite ways to mobilize the heart or open the heart into flexion. And again, I know it might seem counterintuitive because we tend to say heart opener and we think back bend, but we will equally be opening the heart if we work on spinal flexion or rounding, but we are opening the backside of the heart. So one way that I like to do that is with a variation of Sphinx pose. So here is Sphinx pose when we're prone and we have our forearms down on the floor and our chest is lifted up. So I'm starting and I am in extension. I am in a back bend. But from here, I can think of like say a string attached to right up in between my shoulder blades, like right at the upper mid back area. And someone were pulling back and up on that string. Such a nice way to really round my spine. And because my arms are planted here, my shoulder blades on the back stay relatively quiet so they don't jump in and contribute to the movement. Not as much anyway, so I can really isolate this to spinal flexion. Now I could just hold this and just actively lift and like make it static, or again it could be dynamic. So then I could think of a string attached to my sternum and someone pulls forward on the string and then someone pulls on that string attached to my mid back and then forward on the sternum string, and so back and forth like this. This would be a little more of a dynamic way to mobilize. Of course, we have extension in here, but what I'm really interested in for this is that flexion, that lift up. Now let's talk about opening the heart in terms of lateral flexion or side bending. So for this is actually one of my current favorite moves. I really like it. This will use a resistance band. I love this loop band, and if you don't have one, I will include a link in the description for where you can grab one. They're inexpensive and easy to get. But anyway, I've got a loop resistance band. I come up into a kneel and then I step one leg out. Band loops around that foot. And then here we go. Then I take the resistance band straight up overhead. So there's this tension on the band that wants to pull me this way. So do you see how that is pulling me into lateral flexion? I am arcing here and I'm coming into a side bend. So the band wants to side bend me and I let that happen. I can actually arc over, but then I pull up against the resistance of the band to come back up to a tall spine. So as I lower, there's an eccentric contraction of my side body muscles on this side. They are contracting as they lengthen to control this movement. And when I lift back up, those same muscles contract concentrically as they shorten to lift me back up. So this is a great way to mobilize into lateral flexion and to kind of open the heart. See here, I'm opening my heart over on my right side ribs. And then I get to come back up to neutral and work all those muscles in a shortening as they shorten to come up back tall. So isn't this really great? It just takes a resistance band. And one thing that we know about mobilizing the body is that when we do active mobilizations, and we actually work into our end range or toward our end range with active muscles, that is a very effective way to not only increase range of motion, but to also potentially increase strength. Okay, now let's look at opening the heart in rotation, in spinal rotation. So of course, there are many ways that we can do this, but here's one way that I like a lot, and it will use a yoga block and a wall. So we come over to the wall, we place the yoga block in between. So this is my left leg. It's going to go in between my left hip and the wall. So the block goes right there. Then I pin it in place with my left hip. So I'm pressing into the block. And this will effectively stabilize. It'll help me hold my lower body and my pelvis still, because now I'm going to do the mobilization of my spinal rotation. So here's how this can work. Left palm on the wall, I slide up the wall, and then I turn open, and then my right arm just naturally comes up. And here I have twisted, I have rotated, but it's really directed into my thoracic spine. And then I could hold that statically, or I could make this dynamic by moving in and out. So again, the presence of the block and the wall helps my lower body hold still so that this spinal rotation, this heart opening, is really directed to the thoracic spine. So this is yet another way to open the heart that is not a back bend. So now let's look at opening the heart in terms of the shoulder blades or the scapulas. So our shoulder blades are these triangular flat bones that sit on our upper back, and they literally sit on our rib cage. They sit on the posterior rib cage. And when our shoulder blades move around, they move relative to the rib cage. So depending on how exactly we define opening the heart, we could include shoulder blade movement because that's very much part of this region of the body. So in this video, we're just going to look at shoulder blade protraction, which is when the shoulder blades broaden, and shoulder blade retraction, which is when they move toward each other on the back. And there are more movements that the shoulder blades can do, but in this video, we're just going to keep it a little simple. Protraction, retraction. So here is a great way that I like to try to target really isolating shoulder blade movement and mobilizing into these two directions of motion. And we can use cat-cow. So there are other ways we could do this, but I like cat-cow for just a base starting position. So check this out. I first want to show us a really common movement pattern that we all probably do. So we know cat-cow, and that's when we alternately round and arch our spine. Now, it's super common when we do cat-cow to also move our shoulder blades at the same time. So cat-cow is really about spinal movement. It's about spinal extension and flexion, but we generally unconsciously throw in shoulder blade movement at the same time, and then we kind of blur together scapular movement with spinal movement. And here's how it often shows up. When we move into cow or our back bend, we often let the shoulder blades move toward each other and kind of drop the chest so that we have scapular retraction in there with spinal extension. And then we do the opposite when we flex, when we round the spine, we also often broaden the scapulas and protract them. So we blur together scapular protraction with spinal flexion. So if we really want to isolate just mobilizing the scapulas, we want to kind of decouple those commonly coupled movements so that we can really isolate just the shoulder blades. And here's a kind of brain trippy way that I like to do that. You might give it a try. So here's how it works. Let's say we want to mobilize scapular retraction. We want to mobilize into opening the heart through retraction. Now, most of the time when we retract, we also tend to extend the spine because we don't really think about it, and that happens. And we want to kind of break that pattern for this purpose. So what if we actually intentionally come into cat, we round our spine, and we try to hold cat while we retract our scapulas. So it's like the opposite of our tendency. We flex the spine, we try to hold our spine, and it's so tough because you want to protract and broaden, but we want to do the opposite, and it can be a little shaky. It's like this motor control thing, this coordination we have to change. But I'm trying to round my spine while I retract my scapulas. And then I could protract and retract, but here I'm thinking of just trying to work on that retraction, but because I held my spine in flexion, I kind of broke that coupling that tends to happen with extension and retraction, and it helps me to just isolate and truly mobilize spinal retraction. And then we could do the same thing on the flip side. So let's say we now want to mobilize protraction, so the broadening of the shoulder blades. So what if we intentionally extend our spine, we're in cow, and then we protract? So it's the opposite of what we tend to want to do, but I'm arching my spine, I'm back bending while I am reaching my shoulder blades broad. And this should be a great way. And again, it can be tricky because it's the opposite of what we tend to want to do, but it's a great way to like separate the habitual movement patterns we tend to have where rounding goes with protracting. There we are extending and protracting. So those are just a couple of ways to get started with thinking about actually isolating scapular movement so we can know it better, so we can increase our awareness of it, and so we can target it more effectively when we really want to mobilize or open the heart. So these are just some suggestions to get us started on thinking about heart opening with a little bit of a broader perspective. Instead of only defaulting to backbending when we're thinking of heart opening, we could think of the heart as much more of a 360-degree area, and it can also include the shoulder blades, and we could try mobilizing this entire area in more of a 360-degree way. If you appreciated this content, subscribe to my channel so you can stay up to date on all of the content that I share.